I don't know when exactly I started to feel like I couldn't trust my own body. I mean, it wasn't that I ever thought something was wrong with me. I always blamed the little things, the occasional stomach ache or the dizziness that would strike out of nowhere, on stress or lack of sleep. It's easy to convince yourself that your body is just reacting to too much work. Or maybe even just getting older. But it wasn't until I sat at my sister-in-law Lily's dining table, staring down at the cup of coffee in front of me, that I realized it wasn't my body that was the problem. It was them. "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" Ethan asked, his voice warm but with an odd, tight edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Those dark eyes that used to comfort me, now sending a strange chill through my spine. I looked at him, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had begun creeping up my spine, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached for the cup. Ethan had always been thoughtful like this, always wanting to take care of me, or so I thought. But this coffee didn't smell right. The aroma was almost metallic, sharp and sickly, like something had gone wrong in the brewing process. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the knot that was forming in my stomach. This wasn't the coffee I was used to. "I made it just the way you like it," Ethan said, sitting down next to me with his own cup. He picked up his mug and took a sip, watching me intently over the rim. "You're gonna love it, I swear." I forced a smile, nodding along. How thoughtful of him. But as I brought the cup closer to my lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This wasn't the coffee I'd been drinking every morning for the past 3 years of our marriage. There was something off about it. A smell I couldn't quite place, but it reminded me of the time last month when I had ended up in the emergency room after drinking tea at Lily's house. I'd chalked that up to a bad batch of tea, but now, as I sat here, holding this cup, I began to wonder. Thanks for watching so far. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see how far we're reaching. Now let's jump back in. My thoughts were interrupted by Lily's voice from across the table. "James has become quite the barista lately," she said with a smirk, her hands folded neatly on the table. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she emphasized "just for you" sent a chill through my veins. Lily had always been a little too involved in my marriage, too interested in the details of Ethan and me, like she was trying to steer things in a certain direction. But I didn't want to believe that. After all, she was family, right? I took a quick glance at Ethan, his eyes glued to his phone, his fingers tapping away furiously on the screen. I'd never noticed how much he'd been on his phone lately. His texts and calls always seemed to be at odd times, and he'd never let me see what he was doing when he was in the other room. But I'd pushed that feeling away too. It was probably nothing. "Are you sure it's okay?" I asked, bringing the cup to my lips, but not taking a sip yet. Lily raised an eyebrow, watching me carefully. "Of course it's okay. He's been perfecting his technique for months. Just try it, Sophie." My stomach turned. I hesitated for a moment longer, but then in an attempt to mask my anxiety, I smiled and brought the cup to my lips. I faked a sip, making sure to lift the cup as if I'd actually tasted it. And that's when I saw it. Ethan and Lily exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance, and something clicked inside me. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, and I knew then that something wasn't right. They were both watching me, waiting. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel their eyes on me like they were trying to gauge my reaction, as if they were testing something. I needed to get away from the table. "Oh, would you look at that?" I said, pretending to check my phone. "I need to make a quick call for work. Lily, would you mind if I used your study for a moment?" Lily waved her hand dismissively. "Go ahead, but just don't break anything, okay?" I stood up quickly, my legs a little unsteady as I made my way toward the study. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the cup of coffee in my hand seemed to grow heavier with every step I took. As I passed Lily's place setting, I accidentally bumped into it, deliberately stumbling to give myself an excuse to swap the cups. In that brief moment of chaos, I switched my coffee with Lily's. I was in the study now, phone in hand, acting as though I was focused on my so-called work call. My heart raced as I turned toward the door, peeking through the slightly open door to watch them. They were still at the table, both of them staring at their own mugs. My stomach churned as I watched Lily reach for the coffee cup I had just swapped out, and I could see the flicker of something in her eyes, something akin to victory. Lily took a sip. I held my breath, staring at her, waiting for the inevitable. But then, the tremors started. Her hands began to shake, ever so slightly at first and then more violently. She set her cup down with a shaking hand, her face growing pale. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her eyes locked onto Ethan's, her expression one of confusion and panic. "Ethan," she whispered, "something's wrong." Ethan leaped from his seat, knocking over his chair as he rushed to her side. "Nah, what's happening?" he asked frantically, his voice trembling. "Nah, are you okay?" I heard him say again, his hands shaking as he tried to help her to her feet. I stepped out of the study, my phone already recording. My hand was steady, but inside, I felt like I was about to collapse. "What did you put in that coffee, Ethan?" I whispered to myself. I couldn't explain it, but something inside me clicked into place. I knew they were both involved in something, but now I realized it was something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. "Call an ambulance," I said calmly, almost too calm for what was happening. "Lily, stay with me." I dialed 911, my heart thudding in my chest as I kept recording on my phone. "I need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I said, my voice steady, even though my mind was in a state of panic. "My sister-in-law seems to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors." The dispatcher's voice was calm as she responded. "Help is on the way, ma'am. Please stay on the line." From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan's face go ashen as he realized what was happening. He stepped back, his eyes wide with fear, and I knew then that he had been part of this, whatever this was. My thoughts raced as I heard Lily's voice grow faint. She was slipping in and out of consciousness. I couldn't believe what was happening. My own husband, my family, had poisoned me for months, and I was just now realizing the extent of it. The sound of the ambulance sirens in the distance was a strange comfort, but even that didn't seem to settle the chaos swirling inside me. My hands shook as I held the phone to my ear, speaking to the 911 dispatcher with a calmness that felt foreign. I had trained myself to keep my composure during moments of crisis, but I had never faced anything like this. "Not this." The dispatcher's voice was reassuring, but my mind was far away. The room around me seemed to blur as I paced back and forth, trying to make sense of what was happening. I glanced through the study door, watching Ethan and Lily through the open space, their movements jerky and frantic. Lily was on the floor now, her body convulsing with tremors. I felt a deep, sickening jolt of realization hit me. The coffee, the smell, the way they'd been watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled into something far worse than I could have ever imagined. My heart raced as I saw Ethan attempt to comfort Lily, his hands shaking as he hovered over her, pretending like he hadn't played a part in this twisted game. As the dispatcher confirmed the arrival of the ambulance, I stepped back into the hallway. My phone still recording. I didn't know why I hadn't stopped it, but something inside me told me to keep going. I needed proof. I had no idea what they had done to Lily, but I knew it had something to do with the coffee I had just pretended to drink. I didn't even want to think about what would have happened if I had actually consumed it. I had only taken one sniff and realized it was wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't describe. And now I was standing here, watching Lily slip in and out of consciousness, knowing deep down that I had narrowly escaped something far darker than a mere coincidence. The sirens grew louder, and the paramedics burst through the door, breaking the fragile tension that had settled in the room. They moved with urgency, quickly assessing Lily's condition before rushing her toward the waiting stretcher. I stepped back, letting them do their job. The entire scene felt surreal, but there was one thought that kept pounding in my head. What was going on? I hadn't been imagining things, had I? The more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to fit. The strange sickness I'd felt in the past, the stomach aches, the headaches, the dizziness, it had never made sense, and now I knew why. It wasn't my body betraying me. It was them. Ethan was standing in the corner of the room, his face pale, eyes darting around as though searching for an escape. I noticed the way he clenched his jaw, his muscles rigid as he tried to maintain some semblance of control, but I could see it in his eyes. The fear. The guilt. It was written all over him. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. As the paramedics wheeled Lily out of the room, I couldn't bring myself to look at Ethan. Not yet. My thoughts were swirling, and I needed to figure out how to move forward. This was just the beginning. The ambulance would take Lily to the hospital, but I knew I couldn't leave things to chance. I needed answers. And I needed them now. I felt the weight of my phone in my hand. The recording was still going. My finger hovered over the stop button, but I hesitated. Something told me that this evidence, this moment, was far too important. As I walked toward the living room, my mind raced through everything I had seen over the past few months. The strange illnesses that had plagued me at family gatherings. The way Ethan and Lily always seemed to be in sync, as if they were working together. The secret texts I'd caught a glimpse of on Ethan's phone, the ones that had made my stomach twist in knots. I had dismissed them as paranoia. I had brushed them off as coincidences. But now, it all made sense. I stepped outside into the crisp air, trying to clear my head, but it didn't help. The cold didn't stop my hands from shaking. I was suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Ethan, Lily, the coffee. My own body betraying me at the hands of the people I trusted most. I needed to think, and I needed to act fast. The police arrived soon after, their presence adding to the tension that already hung in the air. Detective Mendoza was the first to approach me, her expression unreadable as she introduced herself. I quickly told her everything I knew, from the strange coffee to the phone recording. I could feel her eyes on me, analyzing every word, every pause, every nervous glance. "You're sure this is what happened?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. I nodded. "I'm sure." She glanced at the door where Ethan had been left waiting by security. "We'll need him to stay put for now. I have questions for him." The detective's gaze softened slightly, as though trying to offer reassurance, but it didn't do much to ease the growing dread in my chest. "We'll get to the bottom of this," she said firmly. "But I need you to stay calm. This is serious." I couldn't even respond. My mind was too consumed by what had just happened. Too consumed by the sickening realization that Ethan and Lily had been planning this for months. And now they'd almost succeeded. As the paramedics loaded Lily into the ambulance, I turned my attention back to Ethan. He was pacing nervously, his eyes scanning the floor, like he was trying to avoid looking me in the eye. I could feel his guilt radiating off of him. But the truth was, I didn't want to know what was going through his mind. I already knew enough. Detective Mendoza approached Ethan with the security guards flanking her. I could hear bits and pieces of their conversation as they asked him questions. Ethan's voice was trembling, his answers rushed, stumbling over themselves as he tried to deflect any real responsibility. I stepped closer, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. I wanted to hear it all. I wanted to hear his confession, even if it wasn't spoken outright. I wanted to know exactly what they had done to me and why. I stood just out of earshot, my fingers clenched around the phone in my hand, watching as Ethan tried to justify himself. He didn't even seem to care that I was there, standing just a few feet away, listening to his every word. Lily was just trying to help her slow down, he was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. She was working too hard, taking all the big clients. She wasn't supposed to. "Stop right there," Detective Mendoza interrupted, her voice stern. "You're not helping your case, Mr. Bennett. You do understand that we have evidence, don't you? The toxicology reports, the video footage, everything is in place." Ethan's face drained of color. The cocky man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked like a cornered animal. As the conversation continued, I couldn't help but feel a pang of disbelief. This wasn't the person I had married. The man I had once trusted, loved, and built a life with was now being exposed for what he truly was. A liar, a manipulator, and, worst of all, a partner in crime. Ethan's silence spoke volumes. His eyes darted from the detective to me, then back to the floor. He was trapped. There was no escaping the truth now. As the night wore on, the police gathered all the evidence they needed. They confiscated Ethan's phone, Lily's phone, and took detailed notes on everything they found in their home and offices. But there was something more that I needed to do. I needed to find the truth, not just for myself, but for the sake of everyone who had been caught in their web of lies. The reality of what had happened started to settle in, but I couldn't bring myself to be fully angry, not yet. I wasn't sure if I was numb from shock, or if I was just too scared to confront the full extent of their betrayal. Maybe it was both. For now, all I could do was wait. Wait for the investigation to unfold. Wait for Ethan and Lily's fates to be decided, and wait for the truth to come crashing down. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't going to let this slide. Not now, not ever. The waiting room at the hospital was unnervingly quiet. My mind raced as I sat there, clutching my phone. It was a strange sense of detachment I felt now, a strange calm that had taken over since the paramedics had rushed Lily away. I was trying to focus on the recording I had made earlier, playing it over and over in my mind. The voices in that video had confirmed what I'd suspected for months, maybe even years. But hearing it in real time, from my sister-in-law's mouth, hit me like a ton of bricks. Lily and Ethan had been poisoning me. And for what? To slow me down, to ruin my career, to take what I had worked so hard for. The betrayal seemed too immense to comprehend, and yet here I was, sitting in a sterile waiting room, staring at my phone, waiting for the inevitable. Detective Mendoza had left the hospital to start gathering additional evidence. She'd said they would need a full investigation of my home and office, which meant that Ethan and Lily's phones would be analyzed, and every trace of their sick plan would be exposed. I just had to hold on. The truth was coming out, and there was no going back now. When the detective returned, it was with a serious expression, one that made my stomach drop even further. I hadn't realized just how heavy the silence in the room had become until she stepped into it, breaking it with the weight of her presence. "Mrs. Bennett," she said softly, sitting across from me. "I have news." My heart skipped a beat. "What did you find?" I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes scanning my face, and for a split second, I wondered if she could see the deep ache in my eyes, the broken trust, the disbelief that still hadn't fully settled in. She exhaled and leaned forward, her hands folding neatly in front of her. "We found quite a bit," she said. "You were right to trust your instincts. Both Ethan and Lily are involved in this, and it goes deeper than you could imagine." She paused before continuing, as if weighing her words carefully. Ethan's phone notes had several disturbing messages between him and Lily, details of their plans, instructions on how to make you sick without getting caught. There's also a disturbing pattern that matches the incidents you described, the sickness, the strange reactions. I nodded, trying not to let the tears that were already welling up in my eyes spill over. I'd known this day was coming, but the confirmation hit me harder than I ever anticipated. "What kind of messages?" I asked, my voice almost too faint to hear. "Talk of poisoning you, making you unable to go to meetings, making sure you missed client presentations," Detective Mendoza continued. "There were even plans to escalate the dosage, to make sure it was more effective. They were experimenting, and from the looks of it, they were documenting it all." "Documenting?" I whispered, the shock of her words reverberating through my mind. "Like an experiment?" She nodded grimly. "Yes, they'd been keeping meticulous notes. In fact, we found detailed logs in their office about the chemicals they were using on you. We found bottles of these substances in Ethan's desk, pharmaceutical-grade toxins, some of them linked to medical testing." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process everything she was telling me. I had thought I was losing my mind. I'd thought I was imagining things when I felt sick after every gathering, every dinner, every drink they'd offered me. I had chalked it up to stress or bad luck, but this was methodical, calculated. A plot so carefully designed, I hadn't stood a chance. "How long have they been doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Months," Detective Mendoza answered, her voice unwavering. "Your symptoms, vomiting, dizziness, nausea, headaches, were not random. They followed a pattern. Lily would make sure you were at the center of the family gatherings, and Ethan would pretend to be the loving husband, but in the background, they were working together to undermine you. It's almost like they thought you wouldn't notice. The substances they used, well, they were just strong enough to make you sick, without causing any permanent damage at first. The words hit me like an avalanche, and the weight of them was almost suffocating. Every time I had felt sick, every time I had collapsed into bed, too dizzy or exhausted to make sense of what was happening to me, it had all been part of their plan. They'd been experimenting on me, slowly poisoning me, watching how I responded, and taking notes like it was some sick science project. They must have thought I was just weak, I muttered, my fingers trembling as I held my phone. They must have thought I wouldn't fight back. Mendoza shook her head. No, I don't think that was it. I think they underestimated you. They thought they could do this behind your back without getting caught. And now, here we are. They've been making their moves for months, but they didn't plan on you catching on. She paused again, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes. She knew how much this was costing me, how much I had already lost. They've been keeping notes on everything, on what you ate, on how you reacted. They even had conversations about how to escalate the poisoning without triggering suspicion, she added, her voice quieter now. We also have their texts about the upcoming business presentation. They knew you were up for that big contract, and they wanted you gone. They needed you out of the picture because they thought it would give them the chance to take the lead. The Henderson account? I murmured, finally piecing it all together. That's what this was all about, wasn't it? They couldn't stand that I was getting the clients they wanted. Mendoza nodded again. It seems that way. Lily's been trying to land that account for months, and she was furious when you managed to close it, especially since they requested you to be the lead. I sank back in my chair, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The magnitude of what they had done to me was overwhelming, and yet, it wasn't over. There was still so much left to uncover. Detective Mendoza, I said quietly, my eyes finding hers. What happens now? What do I do next? You stay strong, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The investigation is ongoing. We're already putting together a case. We'll gather everything from their offices and homes, and then we'll move forward with charges. But I need you to understand something, she added, leaning forward. What they've done to you? It's not just a case of poisoning. It's much worse. They've tried to destroy your career, your health, and your life, and that's not something we take lightly. I nodded, my throat tight. I had known this all along, but hearing it out loud was like a punch to the gut. My trust, my marriage, and my entire world had been shattered, and yet in this moment, all I could focus on was one thing: justice. I had to see this through. I had to make sure they paid for what they did. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady now despite the storm swirling inside me. I'm ready to give my statement. I want them to pay. Detective Mendoza gave me a sharp, approving nod. We'll take it from here. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Bennett. The following hours were a blur. I gave my statement, went over the evidence with the police, and tried to stay calm as the reality of the situation set in. It was hard to believe that everything I thought I knew about my life had been a lie, but I couldn't let myself back down. Not now. Not when everything I had worked for was on the line. As I left the hospital, my mind was filled with the undeniable truth. Ethan and Lily had betrayed me, and now they were going to face the consequences. The trial felt like it lasted years, even though it was only a few weeks. Every day in the courtroom was a reminder of how far Ethan and Lily had gone to destroy me. They didn't just want to ruin my career or my health, they wanted to take everything from me. And for a while, it seemed like they might succeed. But now, as I sat in the witness stand staring at Ethan and Lily across the room, I knew that they had underestimated me. They had underestimated my strength, my ability to fight back. The prosecutor's voice broke through my thoughts, and I refocused on the courtroom proceedings. The evidence was stacked against them: the bottles of toxins found in Ethan's office, the detailed logs of their poisoning attempts, the recorded conversations, and the texts. The forensic experts testified about the substances they had been using, pharmaceutical-grade chemicals that were meant to make me sick over time, but not enough to raise suspicion. I was just one of their experiments. And the worst part was that they had convinced themselves that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't be strong enough to fight back. I felt a sense of justice swelling inside me as I watched Ethan's and Lily's faces crumble. Ethan, who had once been my loving husband, looked nothing like the man I had married. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. He couldn't look at me, couldn't even bear to meet my gaze. And Lily, well, she had always been the perfect sister-in-law, the perfect woman who had been playing a game of her own all along. She now sat slumped in her chair, her usual confidence replaced by fear. Her sharp eyes darted around the courtroom, but I knew she wasn't looking at the jury anymore. She was looking for an escape, one that wasn't coming. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and prepared to make my statement. It wasn't the first time I had spoken about what had happened, but this time, it felt different. This was the moment when everything would finally be exposed. The truth would come crashing down, and I wouldn't be the one left to carry the burden any longer. The prosecutor called me to the stand. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling slightly, but my resolve was stronger than ever. As I walked toward the stand, I met Ethan's eyes for the first time in weeks. He flinched, his jaw tightening, but I didn't look away. I was no longer the woman he had manipulated. I was no longer the woman who had been poisoned in secret. I was stronger than that. I sat down, facing the jury, and took a deep breath before speaking. I never thought I would be here, telling my story in front of all of you. I began, my voice steady. But what I went through, what Ethan and Lily put me through, is something I can't keep silent about. They didn't just try to ruin my career, they tried to ruin my life. The room was silent as I recounted everything I had learned. The sickness, the unexplained symptoms, the constant paranoia, the way Ethan and Lily had worked together to undermine me. I told them about the conversations I had overheard, about the texts I had found, about the poison that had slowly been destroying my body. It was all laid bare, and as I spoke, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, about standing up for myself, about making sure that no one would ever go through what I had. The defense tried to argue. They tried to claim that Ethan and Lily had simply been misguided, that their actions had been in an attempt to help me slow down. But the evidence spoke for itself. The toxicology reports, the phone records, the videos, it was clear. Ethan and Lily had planned every step, from the first poisoning to the final, more lethal dose. They had been trying to break me. The jury deliberated for only a few hours, and when they returned, their verdict was clear. Guilty. Ethan and Lily were both convicted of attempted murder, poisoning, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The courtroom erupted in a chorus of relief and triumph, but for me, it was a quiet victory. There was no celebration. There was no sense of elation. There was only a profound sense of closure. As Ethan was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he barely glanced in my direction. He knew the truth. He knew what he had done. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I realized that the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was gone. He was nothing but a shadow of the person I had once thought him to be. Lily, on the other hand, sat quietly in her seat, her face devoid of emotion. I couldn't tell if she was trying to process the betrayal she had just experienced, or if she was already planning her next move. But I didn't care anymore. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. The months that followed the trial were some of the hardest of my life. Even though the legal battle was over, the emotional toll of everything I had gone through weighed heavily on me. I struggled to trust people again. Even the ones who had stood by me. The people I had trusted. My husband, my sister-in-law, had betrayed me in ways that felt too impossible to understand. But I started to rebuild. Slowly, painfully, but surely. I went back to work, determined to pick up the pieces of my career. The Henderson account was mine now. And despite everything, despite how much I had lost, I took pride in that. It was a testament to my strength, my ability to stand tall despite the odds. And then one quiet night, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my own cup, brewed by my own hands, and I realized that I was free. Not just from the people who had tried to tear me apart, but from the fear, the doubt, and the silence that had surrounded me for so long. The road to healing wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be finished overnight. But I knew one thing for certain now. I wasn't broken, and I never would be again.